Hey everyone, and welcome back to Retold Revenge Stories. My name is Clara. I'm 26 years old, and I need to tell you what happened to me last year. My own father, the man who was supposed to protect me, screamed in my face to get out of his house, calling me a lowlife and trash, all because I chose not to go to college. What he, my stepmother, and my stepbrother didn't know was that the failure they were throwing out on the street was secretly a multimillionaire. They thought they were kicking me when I was down. They had no idea I was about to move into my $45 million Florida beach house. And I'm here to tell you exactly what happened 3 weeks later, when they came crawling back. If you're ready for a story of ultimate justice, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to Retold Revenge Stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss a single satisfying moment. Okay, so, to understand everything you have to understand the house I grew up in. It all came to a head on a Tuesday afternoon. The air in my father's house was always thick with a kind of stale resentment. The kind that settles into the furniture and clings to the curtains. I was sitting at the worn-out dining table, nursing a cold cup of coffee and scrolling through job listings on my laptop. It was my designated corner of shame. The place where I was supposed to sit and contemplate my failure to live up to their expectations. Across the room, my stepmother, Brenda, was polishing a silver picture frame that held a photo of her son, Kevin. She polished it with a theatrical vigor, her movements sharp and pointed. "Kevin got another email from the dean's office today, Robert," she announced to my father, who was buried behind a newspaper in his recliner. "They're just so impressed with his pre-law track. They think he could be on the law review by his junior year." She sighed, a sound of pure, weaponized contentment, and glanced at me. "It just goes to show you, a good education is everything. It's the only way to make something of yourself." I said nothing. I just kept my eyes fixed on my laptop screen, feeling the familiar burn of humiliation creep up my neck. I had my reasons for not going to college. Reasons that were deeply tied to my late mother and a promise I had made to myself, but they never cared to ask. To them, my path was simply a source of embarrassment. Kevin, who was sprawled on the couch playing a video game, let out a smug chuckle without looking up. "Yeah, Mom. You can't just expect to get by on nothing. Some of us actually work for our future." The comment was a dagger, aimed directly at me, and it found its mark. I could feel my father's eyes on me from behind his newspaper. The dam was about to break. He rustled the paper, finally lowering it. His face, which used to look at me with such love when my mother was alive, was now a mask of perpetual disappointment. "Clara," he began, his voice low and dangerous. "Brenda and Kevin are right. We've been talking, and we just can't keep supporting you while you do whatever it is you do. You're 26 years old with no degree, no prospects. You're a disgrace to this family." Every word was a hammer blow. I could feel the tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of them. "I have a job, Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I worked remotely as a freelance software developer, a secret I had kept closely guarded. They just assumed my hours on the laptop were spent wasting my life away. He scoffed, a truly ugly sound. "A job? You call that a job? Tapping away on that computer all day? That's not a career, that's a hobby. Your brother is building a real life, and you're just here, stagnating. We can't have that in our house anymore." Brenda set the picture frame down with a decisive thud. "Robert's right, dear. We've given you every opportunity, and you've thrown them all away. It's time for you to learn what the real world is like." The real world, my world, was a universe they couldn't even begin to comprehend. The small startup I had built from my mother's life insurance payout, the one I had just sold to a tech giant in a deal that had netted me a staggering $45 million. That was my real world. But in that moment, seeing the hate and disdain in their eyes, I knew telling them the truth would be pointless. They wouldn't believe it. And even if they did, they didn't deserve to be a part of it. That's when my father stood up, his face turning a blotchy red. The newspaper crumpled in his fist. "I want you out," he said, his voice rising to a shout. "I want you to pack a bag and leave. Now." I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. The final, irreparable break. "What?" I breathed. "Get out, you lowlife," he screamed, the words echoing through the small house. "You're trash, Clara. And I'm done with you." Something inside me snapped. The years of biting my tongue, of absorbing their insults, of feeling like a ghost in my own childhood home. It all evaporated. It was replaced by a strange, icy calm. This wasn't a tragedy. This was a release. Slowly, I closed my laptop. I stood up, my chair scraping quietly against the floor. I looked each of them in the eye. My smug stepbrother, my triumphant stepmother, and my furious father. I didn't say a word. I turned, walked up to my small room, and packed a single overnight bag with a few essentials. As I walked back down the stairs and toward the front door, they stood there, a united front of scorn. "Good luck finding a place to live with no money and no future," Brenda sneered. I paused at the door, my hand on the knob, and for the first time, I looked at them with something other than pain. I looked at them with pity. Then, I walked out, closing the door softly behind me, and never looked back. The cool evening air hit my face, and as I walked down the driveway, I pulled out my phone. I didn't call a friend. I didn't look for a motel. I called the private realtor who managed my properties. "Hi, Julian," I said, my voice clear and steady. "It's Clara. I need you to get the beach house in Naples ready. I'll be there tomorrow." The Uber ride to O'Hare was a blur of neon and smeared city lights. I sat in the back of the silent black sedan, my small overnight bag on the seat beside me, and watched the familiar landmarks of my life streak by. The skyscrapers where I dreamed of working as a kid. The river, its dark water reflecting the indifferent glow of the city. Each one a ghost from a life that no longer felt like mine. The driver had the radio on low, a soft jazz station that seemed a million miles away from the screaming chaos that had just detonated in my father's house. My phone buzzed on my lap. It was him. Robert. I didn't even have the energy to call him Dad in my head anymore. I silenced the call without looking and then blocked his number. Then Brenda's. Then Kevin's. One by one, I digitally erased them, a small, satisfying act of severance. My mind, however, was not so easily silenced. As the car sped down the I-90, the past came rushing back in a flood of unwanted memories. It hadn't always been like this. Before Brenda, when my mother was alive, that house had been a home. It was filled with the smell of my mother's baking, the sound of her laughter, and the warmth of a family that felt whole. My mother, Elizabeth, was the one who saw the spark in me. While my father, a traditional man, would talk about the importance of a respectable profession like law or medicine, my mother would sit with me at the kitchen table with a clunky old desktop computer she'd bought at a garage sale. "You see things differently, Clara," she told me once, her finger tracing a line of code I'd written for a simple game. I was only 14. "You see the patterns, the logic behind the chaos. That's a gift." She was the one who bought me my first books on programming. She was the one who believed that my quiet passion was not a weird hobby, but a talent. My father loved me then, too. He'd ruffle my hair and call me his little genius, proud in a way he didn't fully understand, but proud nonetheless because my mother was. We were a team of 3. An unbreakable little unit. Then came the sickness. It started slowly, then it moved with a terrifying speed that left us all breathless. The warmth in the house began to fade, replaced by the sterile chill of antiseptic wipes and hushed conversations. My mother fought. God, how she fought. But it wasn't enough. Losing her was like the sun being ripped from the sky. The house, our home, was plunged into a permanent, cold twilight. My father was a shell, a man hollowed out by grief. I tried to reach him, to hold on to what was left of our family, but he was adrift on an ocean of sorrow I was too young to navigate. And then, a year later, Brenda appeared. At first, she was a lifeline. She brought casseroles and organized my father's life. She smiled at me with saccharine sweetness and spoke about my mother with a practiced, somber reverence. "Elizabeth was such a wonderful woman," she'd say. "I just want to help your father find some happiness again." I was wary, but my father seemed to be coming back to life, so I bit my tongue. Then, she and her son, Kevin, moved in. And the poison began to seep into the floorboards. It was never direct. Not at first. It was in the little things. The way Brenda would, accidentally, put my mother's picture in a drawer. The way she'd praise Kevin, who was 2 years older than me and effortlessly mediocre at everything, for the smallest achievements, while my own were ignored. "Oh, Clara, still on that computer," she'd say, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You know, colleges really like to see well-rounded applicants. Team sports, debate club." When it came time for me to apply to college, the pressure was immense. My father, now fully under Brenda's influence, insisted I follow in Kevin's footsteps and get a business degree. "It's a practical choice, Clara," he'd said, the words sounding rehearsed, like they were Brenda's, not his. But I had a different plan. My mother's life insurance payout was modest. Just $20,000. It wasn't enough for a top-tier university education, not without crippling debt. But my mother had left me a note with it. "Use this for your dream, my little genius. Not anyone else's. Build something beautiful." So, I made a choice. I told them I wasn't going to college, that I was going to take some time to figure things out. The explosion was immediate. They saw it as the ultimate act of defiance, of laziness. They didn't know that every night after they went to sleep, I was in my room, using that $20,000 as seed money, teaching myself advanced coding, networking online, and slowly, painstakingly, building a software application from scratch. My startup wasn't just a business. It was my mother's legacy. It was my promise to her, made real through lines of code. 4 years, I lived a double life. By day, I was the disgraceful daughter, the lowlife living in her father's house. I took their insults, their condescending looks, their constant comparisons to Kevin. I absorbed it all, using their negativity as fuel. By night, I was a CEO. I managed a small team of remote developers. I secured angel investors. I built a product that was gaining traction in the tech world. The plane began its descent, and I was pulled from my memories. I looked out the window. The cold, gray clouds of Chicago were gone. Below me, the sky was a canvas of orange and pink, the sun setting over the Gulf of Mexico. The lights of Naples, Florida, twinkled like a carpet of fallen stars. A lump formed in my throat. This wasn't just a change in scenery. This was a change in everything. The sale of my company had been finalized a month ago. $45 million. The number still felt unreal. I had kept it a secret, waiting for the right moment. I had naively thought I might use the money to finally win my father's approval. Maybe buy him a new house, prove to him that my path had been the right one all along. How foolish I had been. His screaming words echoed in my head. "Get out, you lowlife." He hadn't been waiting for me to succeed. He and Brenda had been waiting for me to fail, so they could finally justify casting me out. They didn't want my success. They wanted my submission. The wheels of the plane touched the tarmac with a gentle bump. As we taxied to the gate, the warm, humid kiss of Florida air began to seep into the cabin. It felt like a promise. My phone remained silent. My family was gone. My past was a painful, closed chapter. But my future, My future was a sprawling $45 million beach house on the Naples shore, and it was just beginning. The pain was still a dull ache in my chest, but for the first time in years, it was overshadowed by something else, a thrilling, terrifying, and absolutely beautiful sense of hope. The car service Julian had arranged was waiting for me just outside baggage claim. A sleek, black Lincoln Navigator with tinted windows that felt more like a private sanctuary than a vehicle. The driver, a kind-faced man named Carlos, took my single, small bag and placed it in the cavernous trunk as if it were a priceless artifact. "Welcome to Naples, Ms. Vance," he said, his voice warm and respectful. "Ms. Vance. Not Clara. Not the girl who lives in her father's basement." It was the name associated with my company, the name on the acquisition papers, the name that belonged to the woman who now owned a small piece of this paradise. It sounded strange and wonderful all at once. As we drove, the landscape transformed. The sterile environment of the airport gave way to wide boulevards lined with impossibly tall, elegant palm trees. The air that drifted through the open window was thick with the scent of salt and blooming night jasmine. It was the smell of freedom. "It's a beautiful night, isn't it?" Carlos commented, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "The Gulf is very calm this evening." "It's perfect," I replied, and I meant it. We turned off the main road and entered a neighborhood that seemed to exist in another reality. Massive, sprawling estates were hidden behind lush walls of bougainvillea and hibiscus. The properties were so large and the foliage so dense that you could only catch tantalizing glimpses of terracotta roofs and shimmering infinity pools. This was Port Royal, one of the most exclusive and expensive neighborhoods in the entire country. Finally, the Navigator slowed and turned through an imposing set of white gates, gliding down a long driveway paved with crushed seashells that crunched softly under the tires. And then, I saw it. It wasn't just a house. It was a masterpiece. A sprawling two-story marvel of modern architecture, all clean lines, white stucco, and vast expanses of glass that drank in the twilight. The front was a lush courtyard with a tranquil koi pond and a waterfall that trickled over smooth, black stones. But the real magic, I knew, was on the other side. Julian was waiting for me at the massive, carved mahogany front door. He was a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his 50s with a warm, professional smile that immediately put people at ease. He had been my realtor, a secret ally in this new life, the only person besides my legal team who knew the full extent of my financial situation. "Clara," he said, his smile genuine as he shook my hand. "Welcome home." Home. The word hit me with a force that almost buckled my knees. My home. Not a room I was allowed to occupy out of pity, but a space that was entirely, unequivocally mine. "It's even more incredible in person, Julian," I managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. "Wait until you see the view," he said, leading me inside. The interior was breathtaking. The floors were cool, white marble, and the ceilings soared 2 stories high. The entire back of the house was a wall of retractable glass, currently open, framing a view that looked like a postcard from heaven. A massive, turquoise infinity pool seemed to spill directly into the calm, silver waters of the Gulf of Mexico. A private white sand beach stretched out beyond it, dotted with tiki torches that Julian's team had already lit, their flames dancing in the gentle breeze. In the distance, the sun was a bleeding crescent of orange and purple on the horizon. "I took the liberty of stocking the kitchen and the wine cellar," Julian said, handing me a slim, elegant key card. "Your cars are in the garage, the Tesla and the Range Rover. Your personal assistant, Maria, will be here at 9 a.m. tomorrow to walk you through the property systems and get your schedule set up. Unless, of course, you'd prefer not to have a schedule for a while." I just stared, speechless. I walked through the open glass wall and stood at the edge of the pool, the sound of the ocean a soft, rhythmic whisper. This was real. The cool marble under my bare feet, the warm, salty air on my skin, the staggering, impossible beauty of it all. This was the something beautiful my mother had wanted me to build. My phone, a brand new one I'd bought at the airport, buzzed with a notification from my lawyer, Sarah. I'd set up a new number and email, forwarding her the hate-filled voicemails and texts Robert and Brenda had sent before I blocked them. The message was short and to the point. They know. The buyer's legal team contacted them about the fraudulent sale. Mark tried to call me. I didn't answer. The ball is in their court now. How are you holding up? I looked out at the ocean, at the endless expanse of water and sky. The screaming, the insults, the suffocating atmosphere of that little house in Chicago. It all felt like a story that had happened to someone else, in another lifetime. I typed back a simple reply. I'm holding up just fine. I attached a photo. Not of me, but of the sun setting over my private beach, the flames of the tiki torches reflected in the glass-like surface of the infinity pool. I didn't need to say anything more. After Julian left, I wandered through the massive house alone. Each room was a testament to a life I hadn't yet allowed myself to live. A state-of-the-art kitchen with appliances that gleamed under the recessed lighting, a home theater with plush leather recliners, a library with empty shelves waiting to be filled. I ended up in the master suite upstairs. It was larger than the entire ground floor of my father's house. Like the living room below, one entire wall was glass, leading out onto a private balcony that overlooked the ocean. I didn't unpack. I just slipped out of my travel clothes, pulled on a soft, silk robe I found in the enormous walk-in closet, and walked out onto the balcony. I sank into one of the cushioned lounge chairs, the sounds of the waves washing over me, cleansing me. The rage was gone. The hurt was still there, a dull, deep ache, a phantom limb of a family I once had. But it was distant. The dominant feeling was a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. I thought about their faces, the shock that would be dawning on them right about now. The buyer's lawyers would not be gentle. The word fraud would have been used. They would be confused, then terrified, as they realized the lowlife daughter they had kicked to the curb held all the cards. Their world, built on a foundation of smug superiority and my perceived failure, was about to come crashing down. And as I sat there, with the first stars of the night beginning to appear in the darkening sky, I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I felt a slow, growing, and deeply satisfying sense of anticipation. This wasn't just about escaping them. This was about justice. The game had been set. The pieces were in motion. And I couldn't wait to see their next move. The first call came 3 days later. It wasn't to my new phone, of course. That number was a fortress only Sarah and Julian had the keys to. No, this was a frantic voicemail left on my old, now deactivated number, which Sarah had wisely kept active on a spare phone just to monitor their communications. She converted it to an audio file and emailed it to me with the subject line, "The First Tremor." I was sitting by the pool, a cup of freshly brewed coffee on the table beside me, the morning sun warming my skin. Maria, my new assistant, a wonderfully efficient woman who moved with a quiet competence that I deeply admired, had just finished showing me how to operate the home's intricate sound system. The gentle notes of a Debussy piece now drifted through the air, mixing with the sound of the waves. It was the complete opposite of the life I had just left. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the play button. Part of me didn't want to let their poison into my new sanctuary. But another, stronger part of me needed to hear it. This was part of the process. I needed to understand the enemy. I pressed play. Brenda's voice, usually so controlled and dripping with condescension, was a high-pitched, panicked shriek. "Clara, what in God's name is going on? We've had a letter. A letter from a lawyer. They're talking about fraud. Fraud. Your father is beside himself. You need to call us back this instant. You've made some kind of horrible mistake and you need to fix it right now. Do you hear me? You are ruining our lives." I listened to it twice. The sheer, unadulterated panic was a symphony. There was no apology, no concern for me, just raw, selfish terror. She wasn't worried about what they had done to me. She was terrified of the consequences finally arriving at their doorstep. The horrible mistake she was referring to wasn't their cruelty, but my competence. The fact that I had outmaneuvered them was, in their minds, an error I needed to fix. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee and looked out at the endless blue horizon. I felt nothing but a cool, detached satisfaction. The sound of her panic was the sound of my chains breaking. The next few days were a revelation. I woke up not to the sound of Brenda's passive-aggressive comments or Kevin's loud video games, but to the gentle lapping of the ocean against the shore. I swam in my pool, the water cool and silky against my skin. I walked for miles along my private stretch of beach, letting the sand squish between my toes, feeling the years of tension slowly melt from my shoulders. Maria was a godsend. She handled everything with an effortless grace, scheduling deliveries, interviewing a potential chef, and setting up my new home office, which had a panoramic view of the Gulf. For the first time, I wasn't hiding my work. I was celebrating it. My massive monitors and state-of-the-art server were set up in a room filled with light, a space dedicated to the work that had given me my freedom. During this time, the voicemails from Chicago kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. Sarah dutifully forwarded them, and they became a sort of grimly fascinating podcast of a family's complete moral collapse. First came Kevin. His usual smug arrogance was gone, replaced by a whiny, pleading tone. Clara. Hey, it's Kev. Look, I don't know what's going on, but Mom and Dad are freaking out. This lawyer guy is saying something about Dad, like, getting into serious trouble. You gotta call them. Whatever you did, you need to undo it. This is messing everything up. For me, too. He was worried about himself, of course. His comfortable life, subsidized by my father, and by extension, by the second income one had unknowingly been providing for years, was under threat. His concern wasn't for justice or for me, but for his own allowance. Then came the message from Robert. My father. This was the one that truly hurt, even though I expected it. His voice was no longer screaming. It was low, strained, and filled with a kind of baffled rage. Clara. I don't understand. I gave you a roof over your head. I fed you. And this is how you repay me. By trying to send me to jail? After everything I've done for you? You ungrateful child. I am still your father. You will pick up the phone and you will call me. We are going to sort this out. Everything I've done for you. The words hung in the air long after the message ended. He wasn't my father. Not in any real sense. A father doesn't call his daughter trash. A father doesn't throw his child out into the street. A father doesn't see love and support as a transaction that demands eternal, groveling gratitude. He was a man who had chosen his new wife's comfort over his own daughter's well-being, and he was now furious that his daughter had refused to play the victim. I deleted the file. I didn't need to hear it again. That evening, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I went shopping. Not for groceries, but for myself. I drove the Range Rover into town, to the upscale boutiques on 3rd Street South. I walked into a designer store where, in my old life, I would have felt too intimidated to even touch the clothes. Now, I moved with a newfound confidence. I bought a stunning emerald green dress that shimmered under the store's lights, a pair of Italian leather sandals, and a simple, elegant diamond necklace. It wasn't about the price. It was about the feeling. It was about finally investing in myself. It was about shedding the skin of the girl who was made to feel worthless, and stepping into the shoes of the woman who knew her value down to the last cent. As I drove home, the top down, the warm evening air whipping through my hair, I felt a smile spread across my face. This was my life now. It was quiet, it was beautiful, and it was mine. But I knew the quiet wouldn't last. The tremors from Chicago were getting stronger. Sooner or later, the earthquake would hit. They wouldn't be content with voicemails for long. They would come. And I would be ready. The thought didn't fill me with dread. It filled me with a sharp, focused, and utterly delicious sense of anticipation. Let them come. My house was big enough to host a showdown. It happened on a Saturday, exactly 3 weeks after the day I was thrown out. The timing was so predictable it was almost comical. I was in the kitchen, a cavernous space of white quartz countertops and gleaming stainless steel, learning how to use the built-in espresso machine. The air was filled with the rich, dark aroma of freshly ground coffee beans. Outside, a gentle rain had started to fall, pattering softly against the immense glass walls and turning the surface of the pool into a shimmering, textured canvas. It was a peaceful domestic scene, a world away from the emotional battlefield I had left behind. And then, the intercom buzzed. Maria had the day off, so I walked over to the small screen by the front door. My heart didn't even skip a beat. I knew who it was. The screen flickered to life, showing a grainy rain-streaked image of the front gates. A generic rental car, a silver sedan, was parked just outside. Standing in the rain, looking lost and pathetically out of place, were 3 figures: Robert, Brenda, and Kevin. Brenda was holding a ridiculously oversized handbag over her head as a makeshift umbrella, her perfectly coiffed hair already starting to droop. Kevin was hunched over, looking at his phone, a petulant frown on his face. And Robert, my father, was standing ramrod straight, staring into the camera as if he could will the gates to open through sheer force of his indignation. I pressed the talk button, my voice as calm and cool as the marble floor beneath my feet. Yes. Can I help you? Robert's face contorted in the small screen. Clara, open this gate. We need to talk to you. This has gone on long enough. I don't think we have anything to talk about, I said pleasantly. Don't be ridiculous. Brenda's voice cut in, sharp and shrill. You can't just ignore us. We're your family. Family. The word was so absurd, so utterly devoid of meaning coming from her lips, that I almost laughed. There must be some mistake, I said, a dangerous sweetness in my voice. My family would never have thrown me out on the street. You must be looking for someone else. I watched them on the screen. Brenda looked like she was about to explode. Robert's face was turning that familiar, blotchy shade of red. He jabbed a finger at the intercom button. Clara, so help me God, if you don't open this gate right now, I will. You will what? I interrupted, my voice losing its sweetness and gaining an edge of steel. You'll call the police? Please do. I'd love to have them here when I explain how you attempted to fraudulently sell a $45 million property that isn't yours. I'm sure the local news would find that very interesting. Silence. The only sound was the soft patter of the rain. I could see the gears turning in their heads, the slow, horrifying dawn of realization that they had absolutely no power here. They were a world away from their dingy little kingdom in Chicago, where their word was law and I was their subject. Here, on my turf, they were nothing. Finally, Robert's shoulders slumped in defeat. Please, Clara. His voice was hoarse, a pathetic imitation of the roar he had used just weeks before. Please. Just let us in. We just want to talk. I considered it for a long moment. I could have left them out there in the rain. I could have cut the connection and gone back to my coffee. But that wasn't the point. The point wasn't just to win. The point was for them to see, up close, exactly what they had lost. Fine, I said. Walk to the front door. The gate will open for you. I pressed the button to open the main gate, then walked to the massive front door and unlocked it, leaving it slightly ajar. I retreated back to the center of the vast living room, standing with my back to the wall of glass, The grey, stormy ocean a perfect backdrop for the drama about to unfold. I crossed my arms and waited. They entered like drenched rats, dripping water onto my pristine marble floor. Their eyes widened as they took in the sheer scale and luxury of the space. The soaring ceilings, the minimalist but clearly expensive furniture, the art on the walls that each cost more than their car. They looked around, their expressions a comical mixture of awe, confusion, and raw, naked envy. This was not the homeless shelter or run-down motel they had imagined me in. This was a palace. Kevin was the first to speak. His voice a disbelieving whisper. What is this place, Clara? How did you? Brenda shot him a look to silence him. She was trying to regain her composure, to reassert the old power dynamic, but her eyes kept darting around the room, cataloguing every expensive detail. Robert finally looked at me. His face was pale, the earlier rage replaced by a deep, unsettling confusion. Clara, what have you done? Done, I said, raising an eyebrow. I've done what I've always been doing, Robert. I've been working. While you were all calling me a failure, I was building a company. While you were calling me trash, I was negotiating its sale. This is what I've done. I let the words hang in the air, enjoying the stunned silence. Brenda's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at Robert, then at Kevin, then back at me, as if trying to solve an impossible equation. You're lying, she finally sputtered, her voice weak. This is a lie. You must have a rich boyfriend. That's it. You're a gold digger. The accusation was so predictable, so perfectly in line with her small, petty view of the world, that I let out a genuine laugh. It was a clear, ringing sound that filled the cavernous room. A rich boyfriend? I shook my head, the smile still on my lips. Oh, Brenda, it's so much better than that. I walked over to a sleek, modern console table and picked up a slim, leather-bound folder. It was a copy of the final acquisition agreement for my company, a document Sarah had insisted I keep close. I opened it to the signature page, where the final sale price was listed in bold, undeniable numbers. I held it out for them to see. I don't have a rich boyfriend, Brenda, I said, my voice soft, but every word a dagger. I am the rich boyfriend. I watched as their eyes scanned the page. I saw the exact moment the number registered. $45 million. I saw Brenda's face go completely white, as if all the blood had drained from it. I saw Kevin's jaw drop, his eyes wide with a look of childish, greedy disbelief. And I saw my father, Robert, stagger back a step, his hand coming up to grip the back of a nearby sofa for support. His face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. The foundation of his world, his entire perception of me, had just been pulverized into dust. The lowlife he had screamed at, the trash he had thrown out, was worth more than he could ever dream of making in 10 lifetimes. The storm outside raged, but inside the house, a different kind of storm had just made landfall. And I was the one in the eye of it, calm, in control, and ready for the real confrontation to begin. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the drumming of the rain against the glass and the sound of my father's ragged breathing. The leather-bound folder felt heavy in my hand, a testament not just to money, but to years of silent work, of enduring their scorn, of holding on to a secret that now felt like a weapon. Brenda was the first to find her voice, and it was a sound I had never heard from her before. It wasn't sharp or condescending. It was thin, reedy, and trembling with a desperate, frantic energy. No, that's impossible, she stammered, her eyes still glued to the number on the page. She looked at Robert, her expression pleading, as if hoping he would debunk this absurd reality. Robert, tell her it's not true. It's a trick. This is some kind of sick joke. My father said nothing. He just stared at me, his face ashen. The look in his eyes was something I would never forget. It was a chaotic storm of emotions. Shock, yes, but also a deep, gut-wrenching shame, and beneath it all, a flicker of something that looked horrifyingly like calculation. The gears were turning. The disgraceful daughter had suddenly become a $45 million asset. Kevin, for his part, looked like a child who had just found out that Santa Claus wasn't real, and that all the presents were, in fact, owned by the sibling he'd been bullying. He sank onto one of my pristine white sofas, the fabric seeming to reject his very presence. 45 million, he whispered to himself, the words barely audible. You're rich. I closed the folder with a soft, final thud. I am, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. No thanks to any of you. That seemed to jolt Brenda out of her stupor. Her survival instincts, honed by years of social climbing and manipulation, kicked in. The panic in her eyes was replaced by a desperate, cloying sweetness. She took a step towards me, her hands outstretched. Clara, honey. We didn't know, she cooed, her voice suddenly dripping with a sickeningly false affection. Why didn't you tell us? We could have helped you. Your father and I. We would have been so proud. Proud. I let out another laugh, but this one had no humor in it. It was a cold, sharp sound. You weren't proud when you called me a lowlife. You weren't proud when you watched him scream at me to get out of this house. His house. You were relieved. You thought you were finally getting rid of the family embarrassment. I took a step toward her, and for the first time, she flinched, taking a step back. You don't get to be proud now, Brenda. You don't get to claim a single piece of this. This is mine. I built it. Not in spite of you, but with no help from you. Her face crumpled. The mask of sweetness fell away, revealing the ugly, greedy woman beneath. But we're family. Family helps each other. Family doesn't throw their children out into the street, I shot back, my gaze shifting to my father. He was still leaning on the sofa, looking like he'd aged 20 years in the last 5 minutes. Tell me, Robert, I said, using his name again, a deliberate twist of the knife. Do you remember what you said to me? Just 3 weeks ago. You called me trash. You said I was a disgrace. Were those the words of a proud father? He flinched as if I'd slapped him. I was angry, Clara, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room, unable to meet mine. I didn't mean it. You know I didn't mean it. I want what's best for you. No, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. You wanted what was easiest for you. It was easier to believe I was a failure than to question your own judgment, or Brenda's. It was easier to push me down than to admit that my path, the one you all mocked, was actually leading somewhere. I walked over to the wall of glass and looked out at the churning ocean. The truth is, I said, my back to them, I came to a realization. I don't need your pride. I don't need your approval. And I certainly don't need your help. I turned back to face them. What I need is for you to leave my home. That's when the final, pathetic act of the play began. My father, the man who had screamed at me with such venom, actually started to cry. They weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. Clara, please, he whimpered, his voice breaking. You can't do this. I'm your father. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. We can fix this. We can be a family again. He looked so pathetic, so utterly broken by the loss of a future he had just discovered was possible. A future where he could boast about his millionaire daughter, that I almost felt a flicker of the old pity. But then I remembered the coldness in his voice on the phone, the sneer in Brenda's eyes, the smug laughter from Kevin. And the flicker died. There is nothing to fix, Robert, I said, my voice final. The thing you broke, US, can't be repaired. It's over. I looked past him, at Brenda. She was staring at me now with pure, unadulterated hatred. The dream of getting her hands on my money had vanished, and all that was left was the bitter reality that the person she despised now held all the power. "I think you've overstayed your welcome," I said, my gaze sweeping over all three of them. "The gate will lock behind you. Don't try to come back." For a long moment, nobody moved. They stood there, dripping on my floor, the weight of their spectacular miscalculation crushing them. Then Robert, with a final choked sob, turned and stumbled towards the door. Kevin, looking dazed, followed him like a lost puppy. Brenda was the last to move. She gave me one last look, a look that promised a lifetime of silent, impotent rage. Then she turned on her heel, her posture stiff with fury, and followed her husband and son out into the rain. I watched them go, then walked to the front door and locked it, engaging the deadbolt with a satisfyingly loud click. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of their rental car starting, the engine sputtering to life before fading down the long seashell driveway. They were gone. The immense house was silent again, but the silence was different now. It wasn't just peaceful. It was victorious. I walked back to the kitchen, my hands slightly trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a battle finally won. I picked up my coffee cup, but the coffee was cold. I poured it down the drain and opened the gleaming door of the wine cellar Julian had stocked. I pulled out a bottle of vintage champagne, the kind reserved for major celebrations. This, I thought, definitely qualified. With a loud pop, the cork flew across the room. I poured a bubbling, golden stream into a single, delicate flute. I raised the glass, not to them, but to the reflection of the woman I saw in the dark glass of the kitchen window. A woman who was finally, completely on her own. And I had never felt stronger. The days following their disastrous visit were the quietest I had ever known. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was the sound of peace, the sound of a space that was entirely my own, scrubbed clean of their judgment and negativity. The only calls I received were from Sarah, updating me on the legal proceedings, and Maria, coordinating the details of my new existence. The divorce was, as Sarah had predicted, swift and brutally efficient. Faced with undeniable evidence of attempted fraud and the prospect of a very public, very messy court battle he could not possibly win, Robert caved completely. Mark, as I now thought of him, signed every paper Sarah's team put in front of him without a fight. He walked away with nothing but his pride, or what was left of it, and a mountain of his own personal debt that I was no longer subsidizing. He was, legally and financially, excised from my life like a tumor. With the legalities handled, I turned my attention inward, to the architecture of my new life. The first order of business was the house itself. It was beautiful, yes, but it felt like a showroom. It was Julian's idea of luxury, not mine. I needed to make it a home. I started with the library. For years, I had dreamed of having a room dedicated to books, a quiet sanctuary filled with the stories and knowledge I loved. Brenda had always mocked my reading. "Such a waste of time, Clara," she'd say. "You should be out networking, meeting people." Now, I spent a week with Maria, curating a collection. We ordered first editions of my favorite classic novels, leather-bound collections of poetry, and towering stacks of books on everything from astrophysics to art history to advanced programming theory. When the boxes arrived, the act of unpacking them, of sliding each book onto the dark mahogany shelves, felt like a sacred ritual. I was filling the empty spaces in the house, and in my life, with things that brought me joy, things that they could never understand or appreciate. Next, I tackled the art. Julian had populated the walls with safe, generic modern art, abstract canvases of blues and grays that were pleasant but soulless. I had them all removed. In their place, I began to acquire pieces that spoke to me. A vibrant, chaotic painting by a young, emerging artist from Berlin. A series of stark, beautiful black and white photographs of American national parks. a delicate, intricate sculpture that seemed to defy gravity. My favorite acquisition was a massive canvas I hung in the main living room, directly opposite the wall of glass overlooking the ocean. It was a painting of a lone, powerful-looking raven, its wings outstretched against a stormy, dramatic sky. The artist's statement said it represented resilience, intelligence, and a touch of magic. It felt like my own personal sigil. As I worked on the house, I also worked on myself. I found a therapist, a kind, insightful woman in Naples, and for the first time, I began to unpack the years of emotional baggage I had been carrying. I talked about my mother, my grief, and the suffocating guilt I had felt for not being able to save her. And I talked about Robert, Brenda, and Kevin. It sounds like you were living in a constant state of emotional siege, Dr. Anya Sharma told me during one session. You built walls to protect yourself, but those walls also kept you from living your own life. What you're doing now, it's not just redecorating a house, Clara. You're rebuilding your own foundation. She was right. Every book I shelved, every painting I hung, every decision I made about my own life, from what to eat for dinner to which multi-million-dollar stock to invest in, was an act of reclamation. One afternoon, about a month after the divorce was finalized, Sarah called me. Her voice was different. It wasn't the brisk, professional tone of a lawyer. It was the amused tone of a friend bearing gossip. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "I got a call today. From a lawyer representing a Ms. Jessica Croft." I paused, a paintbrush in my hand. I was in the middle of touching up the trim in what was going to be my personal studio. Jessica. What could she possibly want? "Well," Sarah said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "It seems that when Mark's little real estate venture imploded, so did his startup. Apparently, he'd been propping it up with his credit cards for months, assuming a big payday was coming. When it didn't, everything collapsed. He's filed for bankruptcy." I sank down onto a nearby stool. "Wow. That's not the best part," Sarah continued, clearly enjoying herself. "Jessica is claiming that Mark had promised her a significant investment in her lifestyle brand. I think it's an Instagram page with 800 followers, and now she's considering suing him for, and I quote, misrepresentation of future financial status." I burst out laughing, a deep, genuine laugh that echoed in the empty studio. The irony was almost too perfect. The two master manipulators, the smug, superior couple who had looked down on me with such disdain, were now turning on each other, fighting over the scraps of a life built on lies. "So, what does this have to do with you?" Sarah asked, her voice turning serious again. "Nothing," I said, a wave of profound relief washing over me. "Absolutely nothing." That evening, I didn't celebrate with champagne. I made myself a simple dinner, sat on my balcony, and watched the stars come out over the dark, quiet ocean. The drama in Chicago, the frantic calls, the lawsuits and bankruptcies. It was just noise now, a distant echo from a world I no longer inhabited. I had been so focused on the revenge, on the satisfaction of seeing them get what they deserved. But as I sat there, listening to the waves, I realized the true victory wasn't their downfall. It was my rise. It was the quiet, unshakable peace I felt in my own home, in my own skin. It was the freedom to be myself, without apology or explanation. The legal battle was over. The emotional one was still a work in progress, but for the first time, I knew with absolute certainty that I was going to win that one too. I was finally building something beautiful, just like my mother had wanted. And it had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with the woman I was finally allowing myself to become. 6 months passed. 6 months of quiet, steady, uninterrupted peace. The seasons in Florida shifted subtly, the intense heat of summer mellowing into the golden, breezy days of autumn. My life settled into a rhythm that was entirely of my own making. My days were a blend of work and discovery. I dedicated my mornings to my new projects, consulting for a few select tech firms, managing my investments with a shrewdness that would have made my old partners at the firm proud, and sketching out the architecture for a new app, a passion project I was building for myself, with no deadlines or investors to answer to. My afternoons were for me. I learned how to sail on the calm Gulf waters, my skin salty and sun-kissed. I took cooking classes, filling my beautiful kitchen with the aromas of fresh pasta and complex sauces. I filled the library with books, and the house with music. I hosted small, intimate dinner parties for Sarah when she flew down for a weekend getaway, and for the new friends I was beginning to make in Naples. They were people who knew me as Clara, the intelligent and witty sailor, not Clara, the family disgrace. I never heard from Robert or Brenda again. Sarah informed me that they had sold the Chicago house, its value suddenly not enough to sustain their lifestyle without my father's inflated sense of future wealth, and had moved to a smaller, less prestigious condo in a suburb I'd never heard of. The silence from them was the greatest gift they had ever given me. Kevin, however, was a different story. About once a month, a pathetic rambling email would find its way into my spam folder. They were always the same. He would lament his difficult situation, complain about how their lives had been unfairly appended, and then, inevitably, he would ask for money. A loan, an investment, a gift. The request varied, but the greedy, entitled tone was always the same. The first few times, I felt a flicker of anger. The last time, I just felt a profound sense of pity. I created a filter to send any email from his address directly to the trash, unread. I didn't owe him a response. I didn't owe him anything. The final piece of the past was laid to rest on a bright Tuesday afternoon, almost a year to the day after the call. I was sorting through a box of old keepsakes I'd had shipped from a storage unit in Chicago, things I hadn't been able to part with. Tucked at the bottom, I found a small, velvet box. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded white satin, was my mother's engagement ring. It wasn't a large diamond, but it was a beautiful, classic, and elegant ring, a symbol of a love that had been real and true. After she died, my father had given it to me, saying, "She would have wanted you to have this." It was the one thing of hers I had left behind in my hasty escape, afraid that in their pettiness, they might try to claim it. I had asked Sarah to retrieve it, and she had, without issue. I slipped the ring onto my right hand. It fit perfectly. It wasn't a symbol of a marriage to come, but a connection to the woman who had given me my strength, my intelligence, and my belief in myself. It was a reminder of where I came from, and of the legacy I was determined to honor. That evening, I was hosting a small get-together on my lanai. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink. The sound of my friends' easy laughter mixed with the clinking of wine glasses and the soft jazz playing through the outdoor speakers. Sarah was there, looking relaxed and happy in a sundress. She raised her glass to me. "To the architect," she said, her eyes twinkling. "You've built one hell of a life, Clara." I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. I had a good blueprint. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I stood on my balcony, the same one I'd stood on my first night here. The ocean was a dark, breathing entity under a blanket of brilliant stars. The house behind me was quiet, filled with books, art, and the lingering warmth of friendship. I thought about Robert, Brenda, and Kevin, not with anger, but with a final serene detachment. They were small, bitter people, trapped in a world of their own making, a world defined by what they thought they were owed. Their lives had shrunk, while mine had expanded in ways I had never imagined. My revenge was never about destroying them. It was about building myself. It was about the silence that was no longer lonely, but peaceful. It was about the profound, unshakable knowledge that my worth was not determined by a college degree, or a man's approval, or the four walls of a house, but by the strength of my own character and the brilliance of my own mind. A gentle breeze drifted in from the Gulf, carrying the scent of salt and possibility. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It was the smell of home. My home. And it was just the beginning. 2 years. It had been 2 years since my life was neatly cleaved in two. The before and the after. Sometimes, the memories of the before felt like a film about a different person. I'd see a flash of it. The look of disdain on Brenda's face, the suffocating quiet at the dinner table, my father's disappointed sigh. And it would feel foreign, like a story I'd read but not lived. My new life, the after, was vibrantly, gloriously real. The beach house was no longer just a house. It was a home, every corner infused with my personality. The stark white walls were now warmed by shelves of my own custom-built woodwork, filled with books and artifacts from my travels. I'd taken up sailing with a passion, and a framed photo of me at the helm of my small sailboat, the wind in my hair and a triumphant grin on my face, had replaced the ghost of Kevin's law school acceptance letter in my mind. My little passion project, the app one had started building in my new studio, had blossomed. It was a platform designed to connect female entrepreneurs with angel investors, a way to pay forward the chances I had been given. It was launching next month, and the buzz in the tech world was already significant. I wasn't just managing my wealth anymore. I was using it to build something meaningful, to create ladders for other women like me. I rarely thought of them. The filter on my email worked perfectly, and the silence from Chicago was a blessedly uninterrupted peace. But one cool December evening, as I was walking along the beach, my phone rang with an unknown number. On a whim, I answered. Clara. The voice was thin, hesitant, and it took me a second to place it. It was Kevin. All the old smugness was gone, replaced by a weary desperation. I know you don't want to talk to me, he stammered. And I get it. But I had to call. Dad. He had a heart attack last week. I stopped walking, the sand suddenly cold beneath my feet. The ocean whispered at the shore. I felt nothing. No shock, no sadness, not even a flicker of the old familial obligation. It was a clinical piece of information about a stranger. Is he okay? I asked, my voice even. He's recovering, Kevin said. But the bills. Clara, the bills are huge. Brenda is trying to manage, but we're struggling. I thought maybe you could help. Just a little. For old time's sake. For old time's sake. For the sake of the insults, the humiliation, the screaming. I looked out at the vast, darkening ocean. A year ago, this call might have triggered a storm of complicated emotions. Guilt, pity, anger. Now, there was only a serene, crystal clarity. No, Kevin, I said, and my voice was not unkind, but it was absolute. I can't. But, he's your father, he pleaded, his voice cracking. He stopped being my father the day he threw me out of his house, I replied calmly. What happens now is between him and the choices he made. I wish him a speedy recovery. But my life is here now. I have to go. I ended the call before he could reply and blocked the number. I didn't feel cruel. I felt free. I had finally cut the last withered cord that tied me to them. Their problems were their own, a storm of their own making, and I was no longer their port. I turned and walked back towards my house, its warm, welcoming lights glowing against the twilight sky. As I stepped onto the lanai, I saw a folder sitting on the outdoor table. It was the old, leather-bound folder with the acquisition papers. I sometimes took it out, not to look at the number, but to touch the tangible proof of my own resilience. Tucked inside, I found the photograph I had saved, the one of us from years ago, the happy couple with their arms around each other. I looked at the smiling, hopeful girl in the picture, and I felt a wave of compassion for her. She had endured so much, believed for so long. I walked to the edge of the property, where the manicured lawn met the wild sea oats of the dunes. With a steady hand, I took the photograph from the folder. I looked at it one last time, at the ghost of a man I once loved and the girl I used to be. Then, I let it go. The wind caught it, lifting it up, a tiny white speck against the vast, purple sky. It tumbled and danced for a moment before fluttering down and disappearing into the darkness of the ocean. I walked back inside, leaving the folder on the table. I didn't need it anymore. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, curling my feet up under me. The house was silent, filled with the gentle sound of the waves. It was the sound of my life. A life I had built, a life I had earned, a life that was entirely and beautifully mine. My revenge was complete. Not because they were suffering, though they were, but because I was not. I was thriving. And in the quiet peace of my own home, looking out at an ocean of endless possibility, I knew I was finally, truly free.